Welcome back for another Feature Friday. I'm your host, Ryan Glover, and this week I'd like to dedicate our episode to this guy. The Love Boat. And that guy is Sam Gowdy. So Sam Gowdy and I used to work together at a little company called Dupol based in Wales. Sam was the product director at Dupol, and he taught me a bunch, and he was always just a really supportive dude who helped me to develop my own skill set quite a bit, but he was also just an enjoyable human being to work with. And the reason I want to dedicate this episode to Sam is that Sam is leaving Dupol this week. Not for any bad reasons. He's just moving on to new endeavors. He's got a new son, just got married a couple of years back, so he's a busy guy on the personal side of things, and so he's moving on from Dupol. And this week, we are going to be focused on building a theme editor, which coincidentally, when Sam hired me to work on his team at Dupol, was one of, if not the first projects that I worked on. So that was one of the first features that I built at Dupol, was a theme editor. And there's still remnants of that same theme editor in production today on their apps. So what we're going to do is learn how to build a theme editor using styled components. And this is a good time for that because styled components version 4 just came out a few weeks back. And it's a really great library. If you've never worked with it, it allows you to style your React components, but in a really novel way. We'll see how we do it in a little bit here. But that's what we're going to build today, is a theme editor using styled components. All right, so before we get started today, I do want to remind you to check out our boilerplate pup. This is over at cleverbeagle.com/pup. And pup is an application boilerplate that we use with all of our mentorship customers at Clever Beagle to build their products. And we're going to use that as the foundation for our demonstration today. So if you're working on building a product or you have an idea that you want to try out, definitely jump over there and download a copy and play with it. It's 100% free and MIT licensed. And if you're going to build something, we highly recommend it because it gives you a heck of a head start on getting your product out the door. So to get us started, I wanted to show you a library that I really like working with called React Color. And React Color is a collection of color pickers that make it super easy to add color picking functionality to your application. And not unlike what we're going to build today, we can see their landing page. When you click a different color, you'll notice that the colors in the UI start to change. And we're going to do something very similar to that. And we're going to use this package to help us just have a nice UI for selecting colors, so we don't have to have something really basic. We'll have a nice fancy UI to do our color picking for our theme. So what I'm going to do now is jump over to the app, and I've cloned a copy of pup to my machine, and I'm going to say meteor npm I, and that's short for install. So I'm going to say meteor npm I -- save React Color. And once this installs, what we're going to do is start by adding the React Color Picker to our application, and then see how we can use that to help us build our theme editor and actually make colors change in real time. Okay, so what we're going to do is modify the index page in pup. So when you first start pup up, this is the page that you're going to see. And this is just a dummy page that we've created to kind of act as a placeholder for the application and give you some basic information about what you're looking at. But we're going to replace this, and because we're not really adding this theme editor to an existing application, it's safe to build it here because it doesn't really need to go anywhere special. So what I'm going to do is jump over to the application, and I've got pup open to, this is the imports, UI, pages, index, and then this is the index.js file inside of that directory. And again, this is this page in the application. And we've already got some styled component stuff going on here and a few other things, but again, we're just going to get rid of this. So what we're going to do is pretend like this never existed, and we're just going to use this index page as kind of our scratch pad for building our theme editor. So what I'm going to do here is get rid of styled index. I'm going to say, we'll just make that a regular div. And then we're going to get rid of all this jazz. And what I'm going to do is import the row and column components from React Bootstrap, and React Bootstrap is the UI library that we use in PUP. Like the name implies, it's Bootstrap components, so like the nav bar we've got here, and things like this footer and buttons and all that nice kind of UI stuff. That's from Bootstrap, but we use React Bootstrap, which gives us all of those components for React. So they're kind of predefined and built with React, and then we slap the Bootstrap style sheet on top of that, and it all comes together in a Bootstrap UI. So like I was saying, I'm importing the row and column components from that library, and what we're going to do is add a row, and very first thing is we're going to split this into two halves. So as you saw earlier in the video in the introduction, I showed a quick screenshot of a mock-up that I came up with for this, and it's going to be two-sided. So on the left side, we're going to have our actual theme preview, and then on the right side, we're going to have all of our color pickers. So what I'm going to do is say, and this XS stands for extra small. So on extra small screens, this is going to take up full width, and then on small and larger, it's going to take up 6. So these are column sizes. So this is saying 12 columns, and this is saying 6 columns. So what I'm going to do, we're really only going to focus on small screens, which are about tablet size and up for this demonstration, but that means that about half of the screen will be dedicated to one of these columns, half the screen to the other. So again, we'll have our preview on this side and our color pickers on this side. So what I'd like to do here is kind of think ahead. I've got the mock-up that I came up with before I started shooting this video on my other screen, so you can't see that, but I'm going to use that to kind of guide us here. And what I want to do is pre-plan some components that are going to make up our UI. So you'll see here I've got theme provider, and theme provider, I'm so caught up in things like all these provider components and all these different libraries. That's not the name we want. We want theme preview, so that'll give you an idea where my head is at. So theme preview is not a component that exists on screen, but what I like to do when I'm building UIs especially is kind of pre-plan my code out. So even if I'm using something that doesn't exist yet, I'll start to think about the structure first and then kind of work backwards from there. So in this case, theme preview is going to be the component on the left side of our screen that previews our theme. And that theme preview is going to have a few different things going on. So it's going to have a background color, which will set directly on that, and then it's going to have the theme itself, and inside of that it's going to have a title. And because this is dedicated to Sam from DoPoll, we're going to do kind of a mock poll here. So this will be relatively similar to what I built with the folks at DoPoll, which will be kind of neat. So Sam, if you're watching, hope you enjoy this, because that was a really fun project for us to work on. So what I'm going to do is pretend that we're building a poll here, and I'm going to say there's going to be, let me change the names around here. I'm going to say this is a question, and we'll do it just like I did in the mock-up. So when I'm building a UI, I will put in some placeholder text to begin with. So in this case, we're just going to have nothing but placeholder text. So in this case, oh my god, it's Feature Friday, like totes awesome, and the answer is yes. So we're going to put some placeholder text here, and we've got our question, and then we're going to have our answers. So I'm trying to think of how to do this. Why don't we do, is this the best way to do this? I'm going to do something like answers. We have an answer. No, you know what? I'm going to keep this simple. So I'm going to say answer. And we'll say, duh, it's the best. Let's be obnoxious about this. And then we'll have the answer that nobody wants to actually answer with. And if you do, you need to get out of here. Is nah, it's lame. Which, of course, Feature Friday is not. It's like the best thing ever. We're super proud of it. So much for being humble. Anyways, so now we've got a little bit of a demo structure here, or a pre-planned structure for what this is going to look like. And again, these components don't exist yet. We're just pre-planning what we're going to do. Now, the first thing that I'd like to do here, now that we've got our structure, is let's just start speccing these out as styled components. And you can see up here, the index page in PUP actually uses styled components, so we've already got that import up here. And we've also got this other thing, which is two imports, lighten and darken, which are functions which kind of do what they say they do. They either lighten a color or darken a color. And polished is a complementary library to style components. So it's written by the exact same person who builds style components, but it's a separate library with just helper functions. So if you've ever used something like Sass, they have lighten and darken functions that you could use in Sass. Polished is the exact same thing, except they're JavaScript functions that work really well with style components. So what we're going to do is start just speccing these out. So I've got theme preview. And just to start, to keep us flowing, I'm going to assume that these are going to be divs. They may not all end up as divs. And yeah, we'll just have to kind of take that as we go. So I've got theme preview, and I just duplicated those real quick so we have some placeholders here. So theme preview, we have theme, we've got, what else we have? We have question, we have answers. Is that everybody? I always use the red lines from the linter to tell me, hey, is this actually right, or are you just a goofball? Okay, so we've got duh, it's the best, and nah, it's lame. Looking good so far. All right, so what we want to do is actually save this and see how it's looking in the browser. And this might take us a few seconds to load up here, but let's see. And hopefully, maybe I have some syntax. Nah, just being clunky. Okay, cool. So it doesn't look like much yet, but we can tell that our style components are at least working because all of that rendered on screen, and so we're on our way. So what I want to do now is start to give this some style, and we're going to say for the theme preview, this is going to end up being the background of our application. So I'm just going to kind of pull some colors out of thin air here and just make this up as I go. So you know, don't hold me accountable or nothing if this doesn't end up looking good. But hopefully it'll get the point across. So I'm going to say that should be pretty good. And then the theme itself, we're going to say that background is white. Give that some padding. Let's make it the same thing. Again, some border radius. And then for our question, again, this is the text of our poll question. So again, I'm going to say his name again just to embarrass him. Sam Gowdy, I hope you're watching and I hope you're enjoying this. Best of luck in your future endeavors, and best wishes to your new son and your wife. I know her name, but I'm not going to say it just for the sake of privacy. But you know, best wishes to you too. I really hope you end up in a good place. That's pretty much inevitable, but best wishes, bud. All right, so let's see here. For our question text, let's say this is going to be font size, and it's 18 pixels. I'm going to give it a line height of like 24 and the color of, I don't know. It's like a darkish gray. You know what? I'm going to think ahead here and say margin bottom 40 pixels. So I'm a sucker for even padding and spacing between elements, as you'll see here. So we've got padding 40 on the parent, or the theme preview, kind of the wrap around all this. The theme body padding 40 pixels, and then I'm setting a margin. And you'll actually see, as we go through this, that having even padding and even spacing on stuff is super helpful because it visually makes it super nice for the people that are using your application to just kind of flow through it. It's a weird thing. It's totally subconscious, but when you give even padding around elements, it just makes it a lot more pleasing to the eye. And in this case, answers. So the answers, again, these are going to be basically like buttons. And you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to change these to styled buttons. That way because we're going to add some click events to these components, and I don't want our accessibility linter yelling at me, because it always does. Because I'm always trying to add click events on things that you're not supposed to click. So let's see here. Buttons, buttons, buttons. Everybody loves buttons. So I know that background on this, let's set it to that to begin with. And I'm going to give it like 15 on the top, 20 pixels. We're going to keep that same 3 pixel border radius going. And set a font size of, I don't know, 16 pixels. Font weight, we're going to make them a little chunky. You know, like 500 font weight, which is kind of like a medium. So in between regular and bold. And you know what? Why don't we see how that's looking? Alright, so that's not too bad, but I do want to tighten this up a little bit. So why don't we jump back over here, and what I'm going to do is, let me take another look at that. So our buttons are a little small, and I want to make those full width, and I also want to beef the size of this up. So why don't we start with that text? And what I'm going to do is say, I'm going to take some risk here. I'm going to say that's 30, or 24 and 30. And then the buttons, that's a relatively easy one. So let's set these to, let's say display block. And then we'll say this. We're going to bust this one out. This is some advanced stuff, and I'll explain this in just a second here. So I'm going to say, and not last child, margin bottom 20 pixels. Alright, so how are we looking here? Well, that's not bad, but even though it's display block, we also need to say width 100% on these. And we also want to say border none, so we want to get rid of the default border styling here that you get from the browser. So let's take a look at that. Now we're getting a little bit warmer. There we go. Now what's missing here is that because we're dealing with a theme editor, this isn't an actual poll in our application. So the idea is that we want to make this look or represent all of the possibilities of styles in a poll. And so what we need to do now is, the only thing we're really missing is the active color. So you'll notice both of these buttons look the same, and that doesn't really tell the user of our application which one is selected. So what I'm going to do is style up this first one, just because, yeah, you know, it's the best. We want that to be selected. So just to be clear, we're going to modify this one button, but not this bottom one. So we want to show one is selected, one is not. And so what I'm going to do is leverage styled component's ability to take in props on a component. So let's look at what that means. So here we've got our two answer buttons, or our answer components, and we want this first one, it's the best, to be highlighted as the active one, or the one that's demonstrating what it looks like to have an active answer on your poll. So I'm going to say answer, and we're going to say selected equals true. And in this case, we're not trying to make our preview interactive. This isn't something that, you know, we want the user to be able to click on while they're editing their theme. We just want to demonstrate, hey, this is what this looks like. And you'll notice my linter's beeping at me, and that's because I passed a Boolean true directly to a value. And what that means is, if I get rid of this, that is technically the equivalent of this in React. So that's something that's really good to know and keep in your arsenal. So when you drop, or when you're trying to say this is true, all you have to do is pass the prop name. You don't have to actually assign it a value, and React will interpret that as a Boolean. So it's going to say, oh, selected is there, but there's no value passed to it. Oh, that's just a Boolean true. That's just a thing that's there. So what we're going to do is take this, and we're going to reference it up here inside of our answer. And this is where styled components just really start to shine and make user interfaces like this an absolute treat to build. So in this case, we know that, okay, if this one is selected, we want to change the background color and the label color, which we actually haven't set on here yet. So why don't we go ahead and do that. So I'm going to set a default color of the background is that. We'll say that's 888. And we'll see how that looks, because that's still going to apply to the bottom button, or the unselected answer, once we get this done. So what I'm going to do is take this EEE, which is just the default gray background for our answers, and I'm going to replace it with a string interpolation, or a template literal. So the idea here is that whatever I place into this syntax, so $ curly braces, is going to be evaluated and then returned as part of this string. So even though these are backticks, JavaScript is seeing this or reading this as a string. And so what we need to do is give this some value, and we want that value to be changed dynamically. So, and this is where style components is just mind-blowing. So what we can do is say props, and we can invoke that as a function. So whatever goes in between these braces is considered a JavaScript expression. So that could be a function, that could just be another variable, it doesn't really matter, but it's going to be evaluated as just raw JavaScript. And in terms of styled components, they scan this string literal for you with all of your rules, and then they'll look for this function and call it. So that function is going to be called with the props passed to the given instance of that component. So again, if we go back down here, selected is the prop that we're after. So what we need to do is just say, okay, props, call this function, and we want to say props.selected, and what we're going to do is use a ternary operator. So this is like an inline or a condensed if-else statement. So we're going to say if props.selected is true, question mark, do this. Otherwise, do this. And so if it's selected, we want it to be a different color. And if it's not, we want to fall back to our default color, or else. So this is reading as, if this is true, do this. Otherwise or else, do this. And so what I'm going to do real quick off screen here is grab the background color that we're going to use for this. Uh-oh, my doodle's beeping. And now, oh, look at this. This is chaos. There we go. Okay. So we've got props.selected true. If it's true, we're going to apply this. And this is just the Clever Beagle blue color. And I like that color. It's a nice color. It's nice blue. True blue. Just like a beagle. Arrow function used ambiguously with a conditional expression. So let's try this. There we go. So what I just did, you notice this linter is yelling. It's saying arrow function used ambiguously with a conditional expression, which, if you've never seen it before, means absolutely nothing. But what I know it to mean is that basically it doesn't like that we're just doing in JavaScript what's known as an implicit return from a function, and it's just an implicit return of a ternary operator. That could be potentially confusing. And so if we read this, the implicit return here is that we're not specifying a function block. So I'm not doing something like this, where I say return. This is technically reserved for when you have to do some computation. So if we wanted to say like props.selected dot, I'm just making this up. This is totally nonsensical. But if I wanted to do some evaluation or some work, so props.selected plus 5 or something like that, then you would want to be using the braces because you're doing some work before you return your value. Whereas for an implicit return, all we have to do is say, hey, all this function is doing is returning a value, so let's just go ahead and return it directly. And so that's the implicit part of this, is that we're just saying, hey, this is all I'm doing, let's just return it. And what we need to do to get around this error, this warning, is we want to wrap our ternary operator in a set of parentheses. So because we did that, JavaScript is still saying, well, it's still an implicit return. I don't see a function body, but it creates a clear boundary between our function call and the value that we're returning, or in this case, our ternary operator. So if we go ahead and save this, and we're going to jump back over to the browser here, what we expect to see, beautiful. So you'll notice that we get one of our buttons is highlighted in that blue color. And again, that's because we're switching based on the context here. So we're saying if props.selected is true, or again, if it exists, because remember, this doesn't have to be assigned to a direct value of true, it just can be set there. Let's make sure that's clear. So we don't have to do this. We can get away with just passing the word selected, but that's enough to say, okay, that's true, that exists. And up here we say, if that's true or if that exists, we want our background color to be blue. Otherwise, we want the background color to be gray. And as we can see in the browser, it's exactly what we're getting. Now, the problem here is that that text is pretty much unreadable. There's no contrast. So what I want to do is change that text to white so it really pops on that button and we can see it. And to do that, we're going to change the color here to the exact same kind of setup. So I'm going to say props inside of a interpolation here. So we're going to say props, and we're going to say props.selected. If it's selected, we want to make sure that the text is white. Otherwise, we want to fall back to that default 888 color. And so now, once this saves up and we jump back over, we should see a very clear separation. There we go. between our two buttons so we know which one's active and which one's not, and we're off to the races. So something that I noticed while we were previewing this and going through this code is that back in our component here, one of the things that's missing is in order to change these colors dynamically, like we want to in our theme preview, so as our user changes the color, they should be able to see in real time that change happening. We're going to need access to React State, and our index component does not have state. So what we're going to need to do real quick is convert this to a stateful component or a class-based component. And that's an important distinction. So what you want to keep in mind is that these are often referred to as stateless components, but as Dan Abramov from the React team pointed out on Twitter, I'll try and dig up the tweet here, he made the point that it's a functional component, not a stateless functional component, because technically you can have a class-based component that's stateless, and so it's kind of confusing to say, oh, this is a stateless functional component. It's just a functional component. So that's a helpful distinction. And what we need to do is convert this to a class-based component that has state. So we're going to say class index, we're going to say extends react.component, I'm going to pop some curly braces on there, and we're going to take this block of code, delete all that jazz, and from our class we're going to say return, or excuse me, we're going to do render, and then we're going to return from that. There we go. So now we've got a class-based component, and what we need to do now is add some state to this. So I'm going to say state equals, and this is where we have to put on our thinking caps. So up until now, we've been relying on hard-coded values up here in our style component definition. So these are just things that I've typed in, but they're not dynamic. They're not going to respond to user input in any way. And so what we need to do, so just like we saw here, we have props.selected passed as a prop to our style component. We need to get these colors into this component via props, and those colors are going to come from state. So we're basically going to say, okay, pass state as props to our style components, and then we should be able to get our colors into here. So down here we need to think kind of carefully because we've got a few different colors that we want to support. So we've got the theme preview, which is going to have a background color. So we should say, let's try and make this clear, and I'm gonna make this up as I go here. So we're gonna say background equals that. That one's not going to have a text color or anything like that, so we can skip that. This one's gonna have a background color. Let's see, is that true? That is true. The question itself is going to have color, so we want to say color equals, and our answers. So the answers we technically already took care of with the selected, but we want to say, okay, if this is selected, we're going to say background is this, and color is this. And then same thing here, we're going to say background and color. So what's missing here is our actual state values. So we've defined our state block up here, but now we need to pass those values in. So let's just come up with some cleverish names and try and make this work. So we're going to say, we'll say theme, is this a smart way to do this? No, I'm just going to keep it simple. So I'm going to say theme background, or no, let's be careful here. So theme preview background. That'll help us to see as we go here what we're actually dealing with. So we have theme preview background, theme background, question text color, and we'll have, all right, selected answer background, selected answer text color. And we'll just duplicate those, and we'll say, okay, this is going to be unselected answer background, unselected answer text color. So we're just going to pop these in, and let's just do these as this.state theme preview background. Now, some of the purists in the crowd may be saying, oh, wait a minute, couldn't you just do this? Couldn't you just destructure all of your values and you know, do it as this? And I say, what do we got? Theme preview background. It's like, I could, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to leave it be. And you're going to have to deal with that. So take a deep breath. gonna be all right. We're gonna make it. We're just gonna leave it verbose so that it's super clear for everybody watching. So we're gonna say this.state theme preview background. We're gonna say this is theme background, and we're gonna say this one is question text color, and I'm gonna lean on our nice fancy text editor here to just suggest these here. So we got selected, answer background, state selected, answer text color. This one is the state selected background, and this one state unselected text color. Now, if I save this, notice we have no values here. What are we getting up here? Unexpected token. Oh, that's kind of strange. Let's go ahead and save this. I don't know if my thing knows about my class properties here. We're gonna see. All right, we didn't get a compilation error. So for now, you know what? We're not gonna worry about that. So those sorts of things while I'm doing development, I found that I can end up wasting a ton of time going down those rabbit holes of saying like, oh, why is my linter yelling at me? But typically it's one of those things where if it's not excessive, so I don't have a bunch of red marks in my editor, it's just like one little tiny detail. Typically what I'll do is I'll just keep moving until that tiny detail actually proves to produce a bug or something like that. And then once I've got my implementation working and I know that, oh, okay, that does work, it's just fussing about something else, like I need to install an ESLint package or something like that, then I'll go back and fix that. But for now, let's just go ahead and leave that alone. It's not worth the fuss. So let's get focused back on what we're doing. So we've got our state values mapped here, and like I was saying, we don't have any default values in here yet. Now this is okay because we're not technically using these. So what I want to do is leave these blank temporarily, and we're just gonna one by one, so we'll do the first few one by one and then we'll just replace all of them. But we're gonna replace one by one each of these, and I wanna show you how that maps back in the browser so that we can see how this works. And let's start with the theme preview background. So we're gonna take the current theme preview background, which is theme preview right here. And that's a good note. So you'll notice our component is named theme preview, and our prop is called background, and we're mapping it to a state value called theme preview background. So when it comes to programming, I think there's a joke about that. So something like coming up with names and something else is the two biggest problems in programming, and it's true. So always take time to make sure that your names are super clear. You know, I see some folks stress about things like the number of characters they're using, and they'll do something like that. That's not necessary. You know, it's not like it's that much weight. I mean, back in the day, yes, that would have been a problem when you were writing code, but nowadays computers are powerful enough where, you know, you may as well take the advantages of the developer and spell it out and make sure it's super clear, because that does help you later on if this breaks or if you want to extend it in any way and you need to come back to it. And I call that the 6-month test. So when I'm naming things, I always ask myself, am I going to understand what this means in 6 months? And that's the, okay, I put this feature down or I put this code down and then I get a bug report or something like that 6 months later. Am I actually going to understand it? So keep that in mind when you're coming up with names, and don't be afraid to make stuff extremely long if it's adding clarity for you. You don't want to be obnoxious just to be obnoxious, but if it's a name that's going to help you, and if you're on a team, you think it's going to help your team members, spell it out. And defend that opinion, because it actually does help immensely when you're trying to debug code later if something goes wrong or if you're trying to improve it. So what we're going to do is set this to, what is our theme preview background? We've got EEE, so we're going to set that as the default here. And what I'm going to do is come back up here, and just like we saw earlier, so we did this syntax with the props. So the string interpolation, we're going to do the exact same thing up here. So we're going to say, now, instead of doing a ternary operator, because we don't really care, we're just going to return props.background directly. And we're doing that because, remember, background here is mapping to background here. So whatever we pass here is going to spit out up here for the background color. So if we go ahead and save this, and then jump back to the browser, technically we shouldn't notice any real difference. Fantastic. So we notice that it's still the same thing. It looks identical and it's acting, identical to how it was before. But now we do our values dynamically. So to prove that, what we're going to do is let's copy this Clever Beagle blue color, and we're going to replace EEE with that, just so we can see, oh, holy cow, this is actually being powered by our state values now and filtering down or flowing down through props as opposed to being a hard-coded value. And there we go. So we've got a nice blue background around our pole here, but notice this value is all that we changed. We didn't change any hard coding or anything like that. So if you're following along here, this is how we're going to start to do this when it comes to our color pickers. So what I'm going to do is jump back here to our default color, and I'm going to do that for all of these real quick, and then we'll keep going here. Okay, so I've gone ahead and filled out all of our colors here on state. So these are all of our default colors, and these are identical to what we had before. So you can see here in the browser, this looks just like it did when we started. But the cool part is that now these are being passed as state values to our components, and I've also gone ahead and wired up just like we saw in our theme preview here. So we did the string interpolation, so we said props, and then we just said return props.background, whatever that value is, as the background for the theme preview. So I took that same exact pattern and I applied that to our answers as well. Is that the only one? Yeah, actually I missed a few here, so this is good. So I applied this to the background and the color on our answers, and something came to mind. So remember before we had a ternary operator here. We were saying props.selected. If it's props.selected, use this color. If it's not, use this color. And what I noticed was that's technically unnecessary now because we're hard coding which color we want displayed for each of the answers. So here we're saying this should use the selected answer background color, this should use unselected answer, and we're not having to differentiate on the answer itself which color to use. We just know that, okay, we want the answer to use whatever we pass it for the background color. So the answer doesn't really care if it's the selected one or not. That's just for us. So what we're going to do is just rely on the state value that we're passing for background and color on each of the answers, and we'll just return those directly. So up here, I've dropped that ternary operator and all the confusing stuff in favor of just saying, cool, just return props.background, whatever it is, pass to answer, and same exact thing for color. And the parts that I missed here, so we got to do the theme. So we're going to do this, and we're going to say props equals props.background. And again, you'll notice with the naming, this is making this super easy for me to speed through this because I know consistency-wise, all of my names should be the same. So I'm not having to say like, oh, did I call this props.question color or something silly like that? I just made it props.color. And so I can quickly zoom through this without having to really think too much about it. So if we save that, let's see here. Did we miss any colors or anything like that in here? Doesn't look like it. How's our browser looking? I think I just saw refresh, but okay, we're good. So we've got our default styled theme preview here, and now we get into the heavy metal of this tutorial, which is wiring up the React color picker that we saw when we started, and actually making that adjust these values based on which colors we pick. So what I'm going to do real quick is pause and wire some stuff up, and then we'll go through it because it's going to take a few minutes here. So hang tight and we'll be right back. Okay, so I've got us set up here with a new component that I just wrote called color picker. So let's step through that. And color picker, I defined this in the same file. So this is using a functional component like we talked about earlier. And what I did here, I just created a dummy component inline. So typically what you'd want to do, especially if you're using something like pup, is move this into its own folder. But for the sake of time and just keeping everything in scope, just to make this easy to understand, I just did it in the file. So what I did was I created just an empty div with some parts in it. So I've got control label here, which is coming from the React Bootstrap library. So that's just a regular input label. And then what I did is I created this color styled component. So we can see that up here. And all that's doing is it's just creating a stylized box that's going to wrap the swatch, which is the currently selected color that we have, along with the name of the color, the hex string of the color. Better way to say that. So it's going to be the hex code. It'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, some 6 hexadecimal value. And then we're going to wrap in that as well the Twitter picker. So Twitter picker is coming from the React color library that we installed earlier. And that looks like this. So this is the one that I picked out. I don't know, I like that style. It's simple enough and it kind of fits our existing UI. So that's what we're running with. So that's what we've got. And you'll notice back here I haven't completely finished out these styles because I did want to demonstrate to you how to clean this up a little bit, but also not ruin the fun surprise of seeing our color picker and all that stuff working. So back here, again, we've just got this color styled component. And if we look, that's just returning a styled div, and that's just adding a border and some padding. That's responsible for the outer box stuff right here around all of this. And then we also have our swatch. And our swatch is the preview, so to speak, of what the currently selected color is. And that's this box right here. Okay, so the thing that's missing right now is we have the swatch and we have our color. And our color is just this text right here. But it just doesn't look that great. So what I want to do is take our swatch and I'm going to say float this to the left. And then what I also want to do is inside of color, and I'm going to do this intentionally. So you may say, like, why are you doing it that way? Can't you just create another style component? So what I'm going to do is show you that style components are actually quite flexible. So I can specify a class name inside of a styled component. So a parent styled component can specify classes or just regular CSS inside of itself, referring to one of its children. So color here is wrapping this control label component, and instead of just making a wrapper around that using styled components, I'm just going to show you an alternative way to do this where you can actually use the class name in line. And control dash label here, that I'm pulling from memory. That is the name or the class name that's given to that element in the Bootstrap library. So that's not something I picked or we set up earlier during this video. That's built into Bootstrap. I just know that by heart, so I'm just going to go ahead and type it out here. So we're going to say control dash label float left. And now this isn't going to quite look right, but what I want to do is make sure that I got the class name right. I'm pretty sure I'm right. Okay, so I know that's right because now our layout's broken because both of our things are floating to the left, and so the alignment's all goofy. So what we want to do is tweak this a little bit, and I'm going to say, let's set the color to position relative. And the reason I'm going to say that is technically we don't really want that Twitter picker to always be showing. We only want it to be showing when we're actually trying to pick a color. Otherwise it's kind of, you don't want to just drop that in line. That's a lot of UI to just cram into one spot, especially because when we're all said and done with this, we're going to have a bunch of these kind of scattered right here, and we don't want to take up all that space. So what I'm going to do is say color picker, did I do it right? I did. So position relative on the color, which is the parent of Twitter picker, and then Twitter picker itself, I don't actually know the class of that. So we're going to do a little inspect element rock and roll here. And we're going to see, what is this thing called? And from time to time, you'll have to do this while you're working. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. So in this case, are we going to get lucky? Does this have a class name? Let's see. Oh, yes, it does. It's just kind of hidden over here. So it's called Twitter-picker. So what I'm going to do inside of color is I'm going to set Twitter-picker to position absolute. And I'm going to give it a top position of 100% and a left of 0. So those are temporary, but what that's going to do is it's going to make the Twitter picker float outside of or independent of the background color box. And it doesn't look like it's doing it. So let's see here. What are we getting? Where'd you go? Twitter picker. We might have to force that one here. Let's try it. So I'm going to say important And sometimes that happens. So when you're working with a package, if it has its own built-in styles, you might have to force it. And yeah, that's exactly what was going on here. So important, you want to be careful with that in CSS. That's not something you just want to litter your code with, because it's an ultimate override over any CSS that's already applied to a given class name or an ID or any CSS element. Basically, if you add important next to a property, that property is going to supersede or overwrite any property value that already exists. So if we, just to make sure that's clear, if we go back and save this, what you'll notice, it's down here, it's crossed out right now because we did that override. But by default, this library is written so that the picker is a position relative. And so by adding that important on there, we're getting to override that. So we're just going to say, nope, we want it to be absolute because that's how this fits into our UI. And from time to time, especially with libraries, you're going to have to do that. So we've got our picker floating outside of our box here, but things are still looking a little goofy. So real quick, if I come up here and I'm just going to say display none on that temporarily, we'll notice that our box is collapsing, and this is because we're missing a ClearFix on the color. And what I mean by ClearFix is when you're dealing with floated divs inside of a UI, the parent will collapse. So if you have two children inside of a parent, both that are floated, that parent is going to collapse. And that's just a quirk of CSS. So any parent with two floated children, yeah, it's going to collapse, and we need to make sure that we clear those floats, or we fix the clearing, because the thing that's wrong is the parent box here, the color box, doesn't actually see the height of those two children anymore. So we need to help it see them. And the way that we can do that is using this class name equals ClearFix. And that's coming from Bootstrap, but it's not a Bootstrap only thing. ClearFix is just a pattern that's been around for, goodness, 10, 15 years now, if not longer. And it's just a way to clear those floats. And you'll notice as soon as I add that class, it does that. And if we inspect and we look, so we added the class ClearFix, but we can notice that we get, let me make sure I explain this correctly. There it is. So we get an after element here. And this is a CSS pseudo element. So this doesn't technically exist in the DOM. It's just put in there in memory, but we can style it as though it is a real element. So it doesn't actually take up any space in the DOM or our markup, but we can use kind of it's a fake element. We just drop it in, or a pseudo element, to take up that space. And we can see here that in Bootstrap, that element is given a clear both. And that's enough to clear those floats and make sure that they don't squash the parent or collapse the parent. So with that in place, now what we want to do is clean up the label of the color. So this part right here. So that shouldn't look that messy. We want that to be a little bit bigger and a little more stylized. So what I'm going to do is, again, remember that control label is a child of color, but control label is not our component. That's coming from the React Bootstrap library. And we nested this call to the control label class inside of the color component. So again, in styled components, the parent component, whatever that happens to be, can specify the class name of a child within its style definition. So this string literal, or these backticks, inside of there you can just say, oh, we'll target this class inside of the color parent and style it up just like you would any other nested CSS. Nothing's going to happen there. So what we want to do is add to control label. I'm going to give it a little bit of a margin here, maybe 10 pixels, and I'm going to beef up the font size and give it a slightly different color. So I'm going to say, we'll set it to that. And keep in mind, this color is just for appearance in our UI. This isn't one of the colors that we're going to be tweaking dynamically in the theme. So if we jump back over to our browser here, it's a little bit closer, so let's beef up that text. And something I'll do, so I don't jump back and forth and have to wait on refreshes, is I'll utilize the styles in the Chrome browser quite a bit, and I'll do this to tell me what I need to put into the style sheet and save some time. So in this case, 20 is pretty good. The margin left is fine, but let's do some top as well. And that needs to be, oh, I'm gonna eyeball it, we'll say 3 pixels. And then I'm gonna tone down that font weight as well. There we go. All right, so we need to say margin left 10, font size 20. And we're gonna say font weight, I did that as 500. What else did I do? Margin top. I'm gonna say, I'll put that up here. I'll say margin top 3 pixels. So now that just saved us a little bit of time because now we're not gonna jump back and forth between the browser. We can see our change. Perfect. Okay, so now our next task is to make this color picker appear only when we click on the swatch. So it should be hidden by default, but we only want it to show. So I'm going to admit that I'm going to pull the cardinal sin, as it were, of filming tutorials. So I'm going to do the, here's step 1, here's step 2, and then here's step 10, and we're done. Okay, everybody, great job. But I do it with good intentions. So we're right up to the point where we need to get our color picker to show when we click on our swatch. And as I started to implement this with the original idea that I had, I realized, wait a minute, this is kind of messy. And this isn't how I would do this if I was actually going to be thoughtful about implementing this feature and push it forward. And in service of what we want Feature Fridays to be about, and also in the name of Sam, who this video is dedicated to, it seemed right to actually push this idea kind of to the nth degree, as it were, and then go back and step you through how I got to there and how I came to that. And that happens. So when you're doing development, it's good to not just go with what your first result is. It's always good to think, like, can I refactor this and can I improve it? And so that's what I'm going to do here, but I'm going to teach you how I got to what I was doing. So when we last left the code, what we were looking at is we had this color picker component, and it was rendered down here where I've got this render color pickers function. We're going to ignore that for just a second. And what we had was we had a title and we had a color attribute on it, but nothing else. So all this other stuff is new, and we're going to step through what that is. But what I realized while we were working on this is, okay, if we're doing each of our color pickers, and you can see here I've rendered out all of the different color pickers that we're going to need. If we're going to render all of these out, and we're going to try and toggle the color picker itself when we click on that color picker, wait a minute, we're going to get into a jam where these color pickers have no way of talking to each other. They don't. So if this one is open, this one wouldn't have known about it based on the way that I originally started to implement this. So I said, well, let's back it up and let's think about this in a different way. And that's what we're going to step through now. So the thing that you'll notice about our UI is that I've taken our right-hand column and I've split it into 2 groups. So those I've given relatively arbitrary names, but they seem to make sense. Groups of body and answers. And if we look close, we can see that we've grouped together all of the colors that kind of relate to the body of our theme. And then we've got all the colors that relate to the answers of our theme. And if we jump back to our UI here, we can see that we've got on the left side of the column, we've got all of our body-related colors, and on the right side, all of our answers. And this is just a nitpick. This is just me doing this. There's no technical significance to this. I just wanted to have a nice grouping between all the values instead of it being random. So with that in mind, the way that I got to this solution is you'll notice down here, so this whole thing right here is our right-hand column. So again, we have our preview on the left, and we've got our color pickers on the right, but I've further split this up. So I've added an extra row inside of our right-hand column, and then I've added 2 columns inside of that. So this is giving us the 2 columns. So we've got left and we've got right, but then our right column is split into 2 sub-columns. And that's how I'm doing that. I'm saying add an additional row inside of the right column, and then add 2 additional columns inside of that row. And that, again, those are coming from Bootstrap, the column and the row components, so that's using the Bootstrap grid to split that up for us. So with that in mind, what I've done is I've written a function called render color pickers. And the thinking here is that, okay, we've got to loop over or list out multiple copies of the same color picker component. And what I had done before was I was starting to do something like this. So I'm not going to type out the full set of props, but I was just cloning color picker again and again and again. And I realized, like, well, that's kind of messy. And it was messy not just because we were copying the same component, but also because we were assigning props in such a way to the component that we were just doing a lot of duplication. And any good developer knows, you want to stay dry or keep your code dry, or you don't want to repeat yourself. And so that's what this is trying to solve. So if we look at this render color pickers function, and you'll notice I'm calling it twice. So I call it once for the left-hand column, once for the right. And the separation between the two is that I pass a string with the name of the group that I want to render. So I'm saying on the left column we want body, and on the right we want answers. So if we go up to render color pickers, we can see that we take that in, so we say our group name, and then inside of this function we're defining an object with two properties on it, both set to an array. So we have our body and answers. And these two names, so body and answers, map one for one with what we've got down here. So body here is mapping to body here. And the idea is that this array is telling us all of the color pickers that we need to render for the left-hand column or the body list, and this is telling us all the color pickers that we need to render for the right-hand column or the answers list. And so what we've done is thought about what are the things that are changing for each color picker, like the actual values that are changing. And in reality, it was only two. So we have the title of the color picker, and if we go back over here, this is the title part. So here, background color or selected answer text. And then the only other thing that was changing is the name of the state value that we're trying to pull. And again, remember before we were putting our colors that are selected onto state. So here we have theme preview background. This name here, theme preview background, is identical to this, at least in terms of what we're trying to reference. So this isn't a state value, this is just a string with the name of that state value, and that does have significance, but just know that those two names match. There's a reason those are the same. So the reason is that what we want to do is, as we render a group, and again, render color pickers takes a group name of either body or answers, what we want to do is loop over the list or loop over the array of title and color pairs that match that group. So you can see we pass group. So again, that's going to be body or in this case answers. And what I've done right here is I've said pickers, which is referring to the object containing those two arrays. I want to target the property with the name matching the group that we've passed. So again, we've passed either body or answers to this function. So group here matches group here. And what we're doing is we're saying on this pickers object, find the property that matches the group that was passed. So if this equals body, we're going to target this property. And this syntax in JavaScript is going to say, okay, return me the value at that property on the specified object. So return me the value that matches this name. So we'll say body is our example on the object pickers at that name. So we're going to say pickers.body. And that's effectively what we're doing. So a more familiar syntax might look like pickers.body. But the thing that's important here is we're trying to do this dynamically, so we don't want to have to hard code this. So by passing a variable using a set of brackets, we get that. We get a dynamic property lookup on an object in JavaScript and get the value matching that property returned to us. And so this is where this starts to make a little more sense. So again, each property is assigned to an array of the different title color pairs that we want to render on screen, or that we want to use to render our color picker. And so what we've done here is we said, okay, we're going to map over that array, and for each one, we're going to output one of our color pickers. And so what we mean by that is that literally for each iteration or each loop over the array, so we'll take the body pickers for an example. So we've got our body array here, and we've got three things. So for each iteration, there's going to be 3 iterations or 3 loops. We're going to say output or render one of our color pickers. So again, one of these. And so back over here, what we're saying is, well, we only have a title and a color for each one. That's all the information we really need to make this work, but it can seem kind of confusing. So let's step through it and understand how this is wired up. So for each color picker, the very first thing we want to note is that we're giving a key prop to each one. And if you've never seen this before, this is when you're dealing with a loop in React, we're required to give each of those repeated elements a key. So whenever you're in a loop, you're repeating some element, whether that be a color picker component like we have here, or maybe if you're rendering some list items inside of an unordered list. Whatever you're doing, because you're repeating elements, React needs that key value to tell it in memory which one am I dealing with, or which one is the unique copy of this. And so that key needs to be a unique value that is only going to appear once inside of that array or inside of that group of things that you're mapping over, so that way React can find it. So that's most important here of all the stuff, is to make sure that we have that. And next is the two values that we had already seen before, but we're using them in a slightly different way. So the title, that one's actually the same. So title, we're just passing the title from up here in. So again, we say selected answer background, for example, from the answers group, and that maps to title here, which is then output by our component right here inside of our label. And again, that's the text that's showing up right here. But where things start to get interesting is here. So before, we had just typed out the exact name of the color that we were after. So if I copy selected answer background here, we were doing something to the effect of that before, which was perfectly fine. There was no problem with that, except that it was hard-coded, meaning there was no dynamic way to do this. We weren't able to do what we're doing here, where we're looping over some values. We were having to copy and paste the color picker again and again and change that state value each time, which is no bueno. That's messy. Again, you don't want to repeat yourself. So this is what we're talking about when we say that. You want to make this as reusable as possible. One, for the sake of maintenance, but also just for the sake of coming back, and if you have to do bug fixes or anything like that in the future, it's just helpful to have it be that clear. Again, naming and organization and really thinking your code through are the things that are going to make your product really great from the code side of things. And so it's worth taking the time to really think things through up front so that you're not coming back and fixing unnecessary problems later. So what we're doing to get around all of that and to make this more reusable is we're saying, all right, from state, and this syntax is going to look familiar because it's the exact same concept we had here, we're saying on state, find the property that matches the name of the color. So again, if we have selected answer background, we're effectively doing that. And so what's happening is we're saying call to this.state.selected answer background. But we're doing it dynamically. So we don't necessarily know that the value we're going to be looping over is this.state selected answer background. We don't know that. We don't care. It doesn't matter. We just want to know that, okay, when you're looping over this, if you're on selected answer background, set the color prop of the color picker to that color. And that's it. So those are the ways that we're getting the colors here. So the color that we have in this box, that's coming from that state value, and it's mapped based on the color that we have here in our array. So the part where this gets really interesting is considering that we're trying to pick a color, and when we click on one of these, we want to be able to see our nice fancy React color picker. And this is actually where I kind of went off on this tangent and decided to build this out, because what I realized was, okay, if we're copying all of these color pickers to screen, and what my original design was to say, okay, well, let's have the state inside of the color picker to determine whether or not it's this color picker popover is actually displayed. So if I click on this one, I'm setting state internally on that color picker. So again, just on this component. But then I realized, like, well, that kind of sucks, because as soon as you start to click on other ones, and now it's not doing it, but it was as I was starting to build this, all of the color pickers were staying open. So as I was clicking on each one, it was just loading the screen up with all these color pickers and not removing the others, which is really, really bad UX, and it's super messy. And when I say UX, just to make sure that's clear, it's user experience. So as the person who's actually having to use this interface, so not as the developer building it, but as the end user that's going to interact with this, that's not good. And we shouldn't be lazy about stuff like that. So what I said was, okay, well, if that's the case, we need a way to have a state that's accessible to all of the color pickers and shared amongst all of them at a global level. And so what I came up with is this.state.picking4 value. And what I've done is I've defined picking4 as a state value on our index component. And I did that because the index component is wrapping around all of our color pickers. So in effect, it's shared by all of the color pickers. And so if I come back down here and look, I'm saying we're picking for this color picker if its title is what's currently set to picking for. So let's step through that. So when I say click on this color picker, and again I'm saying click anywhere, so you'll notice if I click on the title or the swatch or any of the pieces, what I'm getting is a trigger to reveal that. And the way that that's working is I'm saying on click of anywhere on that color picker, we want to set state on our index component, and we want to say set picking for equal to, and this is where this can get a little confusing. So we're saying set picking for to either title or null based on whether or not the current value of picking for is equal to the title of the picker that we're currently looping over for display. Now let's think very carefully about that, because that's the confusing part here. So we're saying for each one of our pickers, we have a title, which should be a unique value. It should be a unique name. And so what we want to say is when we click on that color picker that we're looping over, we want to set the value of picking for to that color picker's title. So in this case, something like selected answer background, only if the current value of picking for on state, and again, this is the state of the index component, is not already equal to that title. And so the sense behind this and the reason this is working, or the way that this works, is that if we look for this.state picking for, or more importantly, this picking for prop inside of the color picker, if we come back up here to its definition, we say only render or display this color picker if the picking for value is equal to the title of the component, the color picker component that we're rendering on screen. And so what that means is as we click, we're saying, hey, set picking for to my title. And my title meaning this color picker that we're clicking on. Set my title onto picking for, and because that's happening, what's going to happen is when React sees that change, it's going to re-render, and it's going to turn this to true if we're on that color picker, and we're going to see our popover. So back here, I just set this.state.picking for to selected answer background. That matched internally in the color picker, and so it's revealed. But what's neat about this is that picking for is not currently equal to background color, so that one doesn't display unless I click on it. So if I say unselected answer background, that's great. That's the only one that's selected, so that's the only one that we're currently picking for. And so that's a nice way to clean up our UX. We can hop between these, and as a user, my screen isn't getting cluttered up and I'm not getting confused about what I'm trying to set. And so that is the magic of that piece. Now, there's one final piece, the most important piece of this, which is the onChange prop that we're adding to the color picker. And so if we look close here, this onChange prop is being passed to the Twitter picker. So Twitter picker here is just the style of picker that we selected from the React color package. And what we're saying is when that changes, we want to do something. Or in our case, we want to update the state value matching the color picker that's rendered. So if I say, okay, this is going to be like a pinkish reddish text. What I want to do is say, okay, when I select that color, or when that Twitter picker changes, so literally the change is me saying this one, that was a change event. When that change event occurs, I want to call the onChange function passed as a prop to the color picker. So down here we've got onChange, and that function is set up to say, I want to set state of color to pickedColor.hex. Now, pickedColor here is a value given to us by React Color. And so that's an object with a lot of different values on it. It gives you the selected color is, I think it's RGB, a hex code, HSLA, I think that's how you say that, HSLA, but a lot of different options. And the one we care about here is the hex string, because that matches our existing pattern that we came up with earlier when we set all of these defaults. So these are hex string values that we set to our default state. So that's our expectation in terms of our UI. So we're saying we want to set pickedColor.hex on state. But where this is interesting is here, our syntax is a little funky. We're using the same kind of bracket notation that we saw before, but what we're doing is we're putting the color argument that's passed here as we're looping over each of our color pickers. We're setting that dynamically as the name of the state value that we want to change. Now this is really neat, because effectively what we're doing with each iteration of this is we're saying, okay, given an object, we're going to set, let's use selected answer background color as our example. We're going to set or create an object with that. And so the way this is working is, again, just like we saw here, we're saying dynamically select a property on state. We're doing the same thing here, and we're saying dynamically assign a property to this object. So it's kind of like I don't want to say it's the inverse, but it's kind of the inverse. So instead of getting a value, we're setting a value dynamically. And so here I'm saying pass the name of the color on state that we're trying to change. So color here matches to color here. And again, this is the one we're currently looping over, matches to color here. So the end result is going to look something like this, except that it's going to change for each of the different colors in our list. So if our first loop is selected answer background color, the next time this runs, we're going to get something like selected answer text color. And just to make sure that's clear, selected answer text color would be returned there dynamically because we're saying set this based on the name of the color in our array. So with all of that said, we have ourselves an interactive theme editor. So if we jump back over here, we can just play with this and we can say, okay, so notice when I pick a color, my color picker closes. It's real interactive and clear what I'm selecting. And this is probably the most hideous theme in the world. Sam, I apologize. But you know what? Everybody likes their own thing, so we're just going to goof off here. But there you go. We've got ourselves a theme editor built in React using styled components. So that's it for this Feature Friday. That was a long one, but I really wanted to make sure we did this right in honor of Sam. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. If you enjoyed this tutorial, I'd really appreciate it if you head over to cleverbeagle.com/subscribe and sign up to get our latest tutorials and advice in your inbox as soon as they're published.